Hi, my name is Josh Gellers, and I'm a Faculty Excellence Fellow with the Office of Faculty Excellence. Today I'm going to be speaking with you about using social media to promote your research. In this presentation, you'll learn the following: how to explain benefits and drawbacks of promoting scholarly activities using online platforms, how to identify the range of online channels available for promoting scholarship and other academic activities, and how to develop a personalized approach to utilizing social media and research repositories to share your work and generate new opportunities. So to begin, let's talk about online promotion. Why should you do this? Well, there are a number of reasons that it's worthwhile for faculty members to learn how to use online platforms to promote their work, and here are just a few examples. Sharing knowledge with lots of different audiences, being able to gain real-time feedback from other experts and people in your field, informing public discourse, potentially even influencing policy, and one that I also like to talk about is improving access and equity in research, which will allow people from developing countries and people from less affluent institutions the opportunity to learn about the work that you and other people are doing. It can help to foster collaborations with people around the world. Importantly, especially for your career, it can help to generate new opportunities, and it also serves as a way to promote what you, your institution, and your affiliations are involved in. To show you an example of how you can translate activity online into tangible opportunities, this is just a brief example where I tweeted out something involving a recent book that I wrote, and I tagged several people in it. And as you can see at the bottom on the left side of the screen, a representative from a publishing house commented and then asked for my email address, later followed up, and then the result of that was I was invited to participate in a book project. So this is just an example of how you can leverage your online activity in order to generate new opportunities. But that doesn't mean that it's not without some drawbacks. So a few of these kinds of pitfalls might involve opening your career, or even your institution up to criticism from members of the public or other institutions or scholars. You can potentially alienate people based on how you perform online or the kinds of things that you're discussing, whether it's related to scholarship or otherwise. One that I hear from faculty a lot is that it has the potential to soak up a lot of time and energy. So you have to really consider the amount of time that you are going to dedicate to these kinds of activities and how you're going to leverage them so that they can be worthwhile for things like promotion, annual evaluation, building your profile as a scholar, and so on. And then related to that is perhaps it doesn't meaningfully contribute at all to your career, or it's not considered relevant by your department chair or for the process of undergoing promotion or something like that. So these are just a few of the considerations that you should take to heart when thinking about whether or to what extent you should begin or to continue using online platforms to promote your activities. Here's a sterling example. There's current events can be a place where people can feel free to chime in and express their thoughts. In this particular example, a professor from Carnegie Mellon University had some choice words to say about the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. And as you can see, her institution reacted very negatively to what she posted and immediately condemned the statement and disassociated itself with the faculty member. You never really want to put yourself in this kind of a situation, so you always have to think about the manner in which you're conducting yourself online. And as a general rule of thumb, I think of, would my institution be proud of me for promoting this statement online? And that could be a good way of thinking about whether what you're about to post is going to be potentially controversial or cause some kind of friction with your institution. So how can online platforms help you in your career? Well, the most obvious of which is that unlike hoping that people come across your work in a library, they can dramatically expand your reach beyond what is possible for subscription services to really anyone who has a similar social media platform or an account. They can help you to identify and connect with key audiences so you can better sort of segment who you're trying to reach based on the kind of research or the activities that you're engaging in. It can help you to build a following, build community around your discipline or around the kind of work that maybe you're doing locally or nationally or even abroad. And it helps you to promote your scholarly activities more efficiently. So again, instead of having to physically attend a conference and maybe talk about your book or your article in a session, this allows you to speak with almost anyone anywhere at any time, and to let them know about the kind of excellent work that you're doing. So there's a lot of reasons why online platforms can actually really help you, and it just takes a degree of knowledge about how to use them properly that will help you to achieve your goals. So what do you have to do? This list should not be viewed as exhaustive or the exact sequence in which these things need to occur, but it provides you with some understanding of the amount of legwork that would be involved. The most common of which is to create the content. Whether you're recording a video or posting something on Twitter, you're having to write something or record something and then put it out there with the intent that other people see it. Curating your content involves trying to identify maybe patterns of posting or certain kinds of things that you put out with some degree of regularity so that people have expectations about what they're getting when they follow your account, and that you are fulfilling those expectations in a way that shows that following you or listening to what you have to say is helpful for other people. If you are in charge of, say, an organization tied to your discipline, or even like a listserv or a group of people who are focused on a research area, you may have to do something where you are actively managing your community, reaching out to those people, letting them know about opportunities to spread their own research and knowledge. So it depends on how much effort you want to put into that and whether you're involved in communities outside of your university setting, but that may take some additional work as well. If you are on any social media accounts, or as we'll talk about later, research repositories, there's always some degree of managing those accounts that's involved. So you have to figure out how often you want to do that, the extent to which you want to actively manage them, and so on. But typically you'll have to update them with some degree of regularity based on things that are happening in your career or in the discipline or in current events. Another one is, especially when you're talking about trying to understand what you're doing well and what you could improve upon, analyzing your data is very helpful. So, for instance, we know from the literature that if you post on Twitter, you are more likely to garner engagement if you include an image than if you include text alone. So maybe you realized by analyzing your data that some of your more popular posts are those where you include an image and then you use that information back into your posting behavior so that you can drive more interest and more eyes on what you're promoting. And then for the purposes of tenure and promotion especially, but also annual evaluations, you may want to keep records of the kinds of activities and the ability that you have to promote your work online and the kind of interest that it generates. And so you may have to think about what sorts of metrics you want to record with some degree of consistency so that you can provide that information for the purposes mentioned, or whether you're applying for a grant or maybe an award. This is a great way to think about the impact that you're having in maybe a non-traditional way that doesn't refer to something like the number of publications or the number of grant dollars that you pull in. So to give you a sense of the kinds of resources that are out there, and we're only going to talk about 2 of these today, but there are a number of them. And I just want to give you a general overview. You're probably familiar with search engines that are specific to the academic world, like Google Scholar. If you haven't done so already, I strongly encourage you to claim your Google Scholar profile so that you can work on managing it and making sure that it is accurate and portrays the scholarship that you have put out. There are institutional and personal websites. So if you are a UNF faculty member, you may have already set up a UNF faculty bio. That is oftentimes one of the resources that external partners will look at when they're trying to find information online about experts. So it really is helpful to have an updated UNF faculty bio. But you may also choose, in addition to that, to have your own personal website. I've done this for years, even prior to coming to UNF. As a graduate student, I thought it was a great way to promote the kind of work I'm doing and to sort of build my academic brand and the areas of expertise that I'm cultivating some specific knowledge in. Obviously, one that is very common is email. And in particular, you can use that to dialogue directly with scholars that you come into contact with, whether it's people that you met at conferences or interesting works that you've read online. But also it can be used as a way of communicating with larger groups. For example, you might have or might be a member of a listserv and you have a new publication coming out. And so you want to let members of that listserv and that niche academic community know about that publication because it could be of interest to them. The one that we're going to talk about today are social media platforms. And we'll talk about a few of these in particular, so hold tight. The next one is self-publishing outlets. These are becoming increasingly popular, especially as ways to generate revenue among folks who have some degree of expertise or are independent journalists. Two of the more common and popular ones are Substack and Medium, both of which have ways in which you can monetize your work to earn extra money. And they are, as I mentioned, sort of increasingly becoming areas for people who want to find a kind of middle ground outlet that's maybe not a traditional academic journal, but it's also not a newspaper and you're not working on publishing op-eds. It's something kind of in the middle where you yourself are responsible for generating the content and for publishing it online, but it tends to be maybe a little bit longer than you would have in an op-ed format, perhaps not as legitimate as a peer-reviewed article that appears in an academic journal. But they're nevertheless of increasing importance. And then finally, you have research repositories, which, as the name suggests, are places that you can deposit your research so that other people can access it. Together, I like to think of these things as comprising the online academic ecosystem. And so, no matter what your footprint is online, it's worthwhile checking each of these out to see if they might be useful for you in your career. First, we're going to talk about social media platforms. The most common of which is probably Twitter in terms of the extent to which academics utilize it. Twitter is what's known as a microblogging website. And by that, what we mean is that you have a much shorter space in which you have to write something. Right now, it's 280 characters, although Twitter's now toying around with allowing people to provide even longer posts. So look for that in the future. Importantly, it is a real-time updating resource, so you will see things instantly upon them being posted here. And it helps you to reach a broad audience, although of course you can also kind of segment your audience by using like the communities function, for instance. But in general, think of it as shouting into a big room. And people can choose to turn around and listen to you, and other people can be off in the distance listening to someone else. But over time, you can use Twitter to cultivate a following. Again, it's where a lot of academics still interact, so it's a great place to start if you're interested in dipping your toe in the water of the online academic ecosystem. Another one that's worth mentioning is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a bit different from Twitter because it's not focused necessarily on microblogging, although as you can see, you can certainly post images that have text. But LinkedIn, from the beginning, has been more focused on the business community and industry. So if you're someone whose job or academic expertise relates to the business world, or you want to maybe pursue opportunities in consulting, or want to get to know people who are active in the local business community, LinkedIn is actually a great place to engage as well. Another thing that is very useful here is that you'll find a lot of people, whether they are Fortune 500 company CEOs, journalists, activists, or so on, will put a lot of their thought leadership into LinkedIn. So people who have something to say about the way the economy is being run, or current events in public affairs, might go to LinkedIn to share that with an audience that tends to be a bit more professional, probably a little bit older. It's also a place where people go to look for jobs. You may wind up being contacted by recruiters who are sort of scouring LinkedIn for people. So these are all different things that make LinkedIn a bit different than some of the other social media platforms that are out there. But as I mentioned, it's a really great way to kind of interact with people in industry. So if your academic expertise in some way relates to people in the business world, check out LinkedIn. It's a great way to kind of think about how you could foster greater communications with people who are working in that sector. So one that is completely different from the previous two just described is TikTok. TikTok, unlike the other two, is an entirely video-based format that is creative, dynamic, and is something that reaches out typically to a younger audience. So if you have research that you want to promote online, a new article, a new book, something like that, you might have to think about how you would use TikTok in a way that's very different than you would use, say, Twitter or LinkedIn. In particular, one thing that makes TikTok so different is, again, because of the emphasis on video content, that is what you lead with as opposed to narrative. So TikTok videos use predominantly video and imagery. A lot of the time they use humor or entertainment, dancing, music in order to draw attention. So people who are academics who are looking to utilize TikTok may have to think very differently about how they can look to promote their work across platforms and the differences that they might have to, or the different manner in which they might have to promote their work. So if you're using Twitter, for example, you might be using text and an image, whereas for TikTok, you might be using a funny video that has sparse use of text, but that nevertheless communicates the nuts and bolts of a new piece of literature. So if you're interested, there's a terrific article. I'm going to move my little graphic up here for a moment so that you can have an opportunity to scan the QR code here, which goes to a 2020 article that does a great job of providing a typology of social media functions. And so what you can see in the image on the left here are a number of different ways in which people use social media for academic purposes. And I'll just highlight a couple of examples. One that's very common is the new publication announcement, which is the first box that you see on the left in the top. That's where someone says, I have a new article coming out. They might have a link to the article, which is very useful, and then an image, either it's depicting the abstract, or maybe there's an image that was included in the article, and that helps to, again, draw more attention to it. Another one that's really interesting is promoting junior faculty. So here is a use of social media that is not entirely self-serving, but one that you are using to promote what other people, either at your institution or elsewhere, are doing. And it could be someone else's article, it could be someone else just won an award, but it kind of shows goodwill and helps to demonstrate that you are a nice person in academia, which unfortunately isn't always the case. And then finally, if you are working with a conference or a professional organization that is hosting an event, you may want to advertise the call for abstracts, which is depicted on the top right. And so this is a great way to disseminate this call for abstracts to a broader audience than maybe you might be capable of by simply using email. So take a look at these, examine the article itself. It's chock full of great information, but it gives you a sense of the diversity of opportunities that you can have to take social media and utilize it in a way that's beneficial for you and the scholarly communities that you interact with. So here are a few examples of what I think of as effective social media posts across the different platforms that we just talked about. So the first one that you see is from Twitter, and it does a few things that I want to point out. One is it says the name of the article. It tags the journal itself, so the journal might wind up resharing this information. Importantly, it provides a link to the article, so if people are interested in checking it out, they can click right on it. And then, as mentioned before, they use a screen capture of the abstract, so you can read right on the tweet itself what the entirety of the article is about without having to click through it. So this is sort of a quintessential, great example of using Twitter to promote a new publication. The one in the middle happened on LinkedIn. And here you have someone who is advertising for a position at their organization, which is the University of Cambridge. And they provide a little bit more of a narrative about what the person that they're looking for would be working on. They tag people, which are indicated in the blue text, as well as the institutions themselves, which gives them an opportunity to know that this individual is sharing this information. They can simply reshare it because they're going to get notified that someone has tagged them. And then, of course, it provides a link, which is really helpful if you're applying for a job. You can click right to it. And then they've used hashtags, which is a way of sort of filing it into these different categories or folders that people might be following in order to find out the latest information about the topics that are listed. For example, AI ethics, sustainability, design justice, and so on. So that's another great way that uses LinkedIn to promote a job in the academic world. And then finally, one that's completely different, but nevertheless helpful to think about, is this one from TikTok. So the video that's depicted here is from a well-known researcher in the Netherlands who focuses on misinformation and radicalization online, and in particular on TikTok. And so as you can see here, just from this little snippet, the image is primarily the researcher with limited words used on the image right now. And so this gives you a sense of how vastly different TikTok is than some of the other platforms that I've been discussing. It, again, leads with the video and uses very little wording so that the focus is on the academic and the narrative or the story that they're telling, as opposed to the words, the language, and so on. So it's a bit more like storytelling than it is about posting some literature online. So what are some tips for using social media? First, create a positive feedback loop with posts, interactions, and follows. This is sort of a way of, again, demonstrating goodwill, but also it's a way to drive more interest because of the way that these algorithms operate. Posts that have more interaction are the ones that people will tend to see more often. And the more often that you do that, the more often that that's going to drive attention to you and the sorts of things that you're posting. Another one, which I've already mentioned, but is nevertheless helpful to reiterate, is to include images and shortened links. This allows people to have something that can be visually stimulating, and then also give them an opportunity to follow up by clicking something relating to whatever they're posting right away without having to dig through Google or anything else to find information about what you're describing. One that I've mentioned in the previous slide is to consider the platform. Depending on which platform you choose, you may have a completely different strategy in terms of what the content is going to look like. So if you're going to use Twitter or you're going to use TikTok, for example, you're going to use them in very different ways. You may use them for the same exact purpose, but both of the posts should look very different because you're speaking in some ways to different audiences, and both of those platforms utilize different kinds of strategies or prioritize different aspects of posts, like visual imagery versus links and engagement. Another thing which I mentioned from the previous slide is to use what are called hashtags, where you have sort of a pound sign and then a word that serves as a kind of way of taking that word and filing it away so that people who follow those hashtags will come across them. And it could be anything relating to your post or some current event that's going on that you're commenting on, but it's just a way for people to find your post and to find you. Another one which is very important is to strive for personal brand consistency. So imagine how confused people will be if you have one social media account that is entirely devoted to your scholarship and another one that's all about bugs you've found around Jacksonville. It'll be, especially if you're not someone who works in biology, it'll seem very confusing. So what you want to strive for is that across your platforms, even if you have slightly different bios and things like that, that you have overall a general similar kind of approach in terms of the kind of content you're providing, the tone of your posts, the degree to which you're using images or humor or something like that, so people can know what it is that they're getting when you post something. And that may make them more inclined to follow you on those other platforms as well. Another important rule is to not be a one-trick pony. So vary your content. One rule of thumb that I like to point to is what's called the rule of thirds. And this involves something along the lines of 1/3 of the posts are promoting things that you're doing. 1/3 of the posts are commenting on things that are happening or other people are sharing. And then another third are promoting the work of other people. So that helps to provide some diversity in terms of the content that you're offering online, and also shows that you're not just, ad nauseum promoting your own work, or you're not really in tune with what's going on in the world, or you seem like you're sort of very insular and you're not thinking about the next generation of scholars. So think about how you might vary your content along those lines so that you can really keep it fresh and find other people who might be interested in the different sorts of things that you're going to be posting. And then, as I mentioned before, it's really cool to think before you post. If you think that something you say could be controversial or could look bad for your institution or for you, or heaven forbid, your family or your colleagues, it's really important that you think about that before you post, because those ramifications can be long lasting, especially because people can take snapshots of your social media posts and then use them on their own websites, and then they live there forever. So it's really important to think about that as you engage in your social media journey. So the next thing that we're going to talk about are research repositories, which, as I mentioned, are places where you can store your research and people can find out about it and access it. The first research repository I'm going to mention here is ResearchGate. And as the name suggests, it's a place where you can share your research. You can find new works or old works and also connect with scholars. And as I mentioned a few slides ago, this is a way that you can actually increase access, because people from the developing world and people from less affluent institutions can trawl through websites like ResearchGate, and they can find research that maybe they don't have access to through their libraries. But ResearchGate and others allow them to contact the author directly and to request that information so that they can have it sent to them, which is really helpful if they don't have a subscription. As you can see from the top of the screen here, there are notifications, there are messages, and there are direct messages. And so this is a way for ResearchGate to signal to you that people are reaching out to you and asking for access to your research, or maybe ResearchGate is letting you know about new research that's coming out that is very relevant to your own area. So this is, again, a great way for people to get in touch with other scholars, to get access to research that maybe you haven't found on other platforms like Google Scholar. In fact, one of my longstanding research partnerships was facilitated through ResearchGate when a scholar in the developing world sent me a question, and we connected, and then we started to work together. So it's a way of sort of democratizing access to research, and I've personally found it very helpful. Another one that I've also used is academia.edu, which in some ways is very similar to ResearchGate, but also has slightly different bells and whistles. So just like ResearchGate, it allows you to share your research, but it provides some advanced analytics in terms of looking at which institutions or people from which institutions have looked at your scholarship, which kinds of works are they looking at, and so on. You can pay additional money to purchase a premium version of this, which allows you to drill down into even more specific analytics. That's a choice that you'll have to make and whether you find that useful, but it is an option that academia.edu provides. Just like with ResearchGate, academia.edu allows you to interact with the research that you're seeing. So you can like something, you can share it, you can comment on it, you can comment to or send a direct message to the author directly. And again, this is a great way of sort of fostering a kind of intellectual community using this sort of research repository. Another one that I'll talk about, which gained a lot of interest during the pandemic, is Archive. Archive itself, although there are some spin-offs that are more focused on social sciences, is a primarily science-focused database that has a very simple user interface, as you can see. And what it became most famous for is providing preprints, especially scientific ones, for people to access immediately upon them being posted. Now, the downside of this is that, as Archive mentions explicitly here, none of the articles are peer-reviewed by Archive itself, which means that quality control can be somewhat of an issue. But if what you're interested in getting is initial feedback from the public or other scholars, Archive is a quick way to facilitate that, and it's one that a lot of researchers, members of the media, and the public utilize. So here are a few tips for using research repositories. One is add all of your research, but with a caveat. You may not be able to actually upload the final version of a journal article or a book according to the copyright policies of the publisher. So before you post anything online, make sure that you check the copyright policy of all of the publishers that you've worked with. Another way around this is that you can post that you have published something, but then you can retain a private copy and people can message you to ask for a copy, and that is usually okay under copyright policy, even if you're not allowed to publish a version of it online where anyone can just download it at their leisure. Another thing is to not just use this as a one-way tool, but to engage with other scholars and their works. So sending messages to people, commenting on works in progress, sharing things, liking it, and so on. Another one which kind of delves or dovetails with one of the comments made earlier about your recording data and including that in information on things like annual evaluations and so on, is to check your sites and analytics. One reason for this is that some of these research repositories may pick up citations that are not picked up on Web of Science or Google Scholar, so you can actually find more citations that way. Also, because of the analytics that they offer, you might be able to find out which universities, which countries, and so on are reading your work, and that may help you to better understand how you should target the dissemination of future work. You should update them when appropriate. I typically will update my research repositories when I've published something new. You can promote across platforms. So if you have one, for example, you've just posted something on academia.edu, you can post on Twitter that you have just uploaded something to academia.edu, and that is a place where people can find it. And then finally, pay it forward. Again, think of these as opportunities to cultivate academic communities, foster goodwill among scholars, and so on. So when someone likes something that you have posted, or they comment on it, or they share it, or they ask for you to share something with them, be kind, think about how you can help them as well, and that will help to create kind of a nicer academic environment for everyone. So a few further steps that you may want to think about once you have considered the social media platforms and research repositories that you're interested in working with. One is to articulate a social media philosophy. How will you conduct yourself online? How will you deal with the prospect of criticism or bullying? What is your overall ethos when it comes to interacting with others on social media? That's an important thing to do, so you may want to sit down and sort of draft out a social media philosophy that will help you to guide your social media activity in the future. More in terms of thinking about how you can use social media to achieve your objectives, consider developing a social media strategy where you talk about things like the regularity with which you post, the kinds of things you'll post, and so on. That will help you to stay honest with the kind of approach that you want to take with respect to the goals that you are seeking to achieve. And it can also lessen the anxiety about having to do too much or the amount of time you're going to dedicate to it if you develop a social media strategy that clearly defines the kind of activity that you're willing to engage in, and the amount of time and energy you're willing to spend on it. Decide how you will measure impact. Is it going to be in terms of the number of likes or shares or the number of views or how many of these posts or what kinds of posts ultimately translate into opportunities? Think about that and how you would communicate that in things like annual evaluations. So that's just something that you want to keep in mind. Again, I want to reiterate that you should strive for personal brand consistency. So once you identify the kind of personal brand that you are articulating online, think about how you can utilize that across platforms so people know what they're going to get when they interact with you, when they follow you, and so on. And then finally, have fun with it. Experiment, evaluate what you are doing, and then revise accordingly. There's no perfect one way to go about using social media or about your activities on research repositories. Some of this will be determined by your own trials and tribulations. So, don't be afraid to kind of challenge yourself in a way to think about how you can creatively use these resources to promote the things that you're doing in academia and beyond. So that's all I have. If you would like to keep in touch and you have some questions about this, feel free to reach out to me. My email and Twitter and website are listed above, or if you'd like to scan the QR code, you can access me that way as well. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you found this helpful, and good luck working online.